The scanner flashed yellow, not red, and the reading made no sense at all. Krexol had run 847 trials on the cacti fields of Torvak Prime. He knew what the scanner was supposed to say. Red meant injury. Red meant toxin load. Red meant a cadet was already falling, and the extraction team had about 90 seconds before the situation became paperwork. This was the first time in his career the light had come back yellow. He leaned forward. His throat pouch, which had been loose and easy all morning, went flat. The screen read, Subject 47, neurotoxin absorption, 22%. Metabolic conversion ongoing. Toxin categorization, reclassified as nutrient, type F. Class 9 qualification, 51 entrants. 3 fatalities, painted on the orbital platform's hull in white phosphorus ink, so the next group could see the number before they stepped off. No mammal had passed this trial in 12,000 years of Academy records. Not one. And right now, 6 hours into the night cycle on Torvak Prime, a soft-shelled human cadet with no armor and exposed neck arteries was inside a 16-meter needlethorn cactus, and her biometric scanner was calling the neurotoxin dinner. Krexol's 3 hearts skipped, not together, in sequence. The third one last like it got the news a little late. On the camera feed, a small figure finished crawling into a hole in the cactus wall. The slit she had cut was about 40 centimeters long. She pulled her legs in after her. The cactus closed around her like a mouth. No warning, no precedent, no category. The feed stayed green. The part that still keeps me up at night, what her body did in the dark, stay close. 6 hours before that reading, Krexol had been bored. That was the honest truth of it. Or rather, he had been professionally attentive, which in his case looked almost identical to bored from the outside. He was logging intake form 847C on his secondary screen. His morning drink had gone cold. The reinforced observation glass in front of him showed 80 degrees of open desert. Purple sand, green-spined cacti stretching up 12 to 16 meters. The air above the sand already warping from the heat at only 1330 hours. He had seen this view 847 times. It had stopped being interesting around view 200. At 1340, the transport dropped to the platform's lower deck, and the cadets began to disembark. Krexol pulled up the biometric intake feeds out of habit. 55 new readings lit up across his board, each one a color-coded stripe of vitals, heart rates, body temperature, exoskeletal stress readings, fluid balance. Most of the stripes were wide. Most of them ran orange and gold, the colors of large, warm bodies in a hot environment, already adjusting, already compensating. He had seen those stripes 847 times too. Feed 47 came up last. It was narrow. The stripe was pale blue, which was the color the system used when it was not sure what it was looking at. Krexol looked at the intake data attached to that feed. He read the height, 5 feet 3 inches. He read the armor classification, none. He read the natural protection index, 0.4, which put the candidate somewhere between a standard mammal and a particularly unfortunate piece of luggage. He looked at the species tag, Homo sapiens, Earth origin. His throat pouch went slightly flat, not all the way, just enough that his junior examiner, Vrix, glanced over. Problem? Vrix asked. He was Threxian, tall, crystalline joints at the shoulders and knees, the kind of build that looked like it had been designed to exist in hostile places. No, Krexol said. He watched Feed 47 step off the transport ramp. She was small. That was the first thing, just how small she was against the other cadets. The Threxians in the group were running about 160 to 190 kilograms each, their shoulder joints catching the light. The Qualeri hive, 6 bodies operating as one thermal unit, moved together in a cluster near the left side of the ramp, pressing shoulder to shoulder in a way that was either coordination or anxiety. The Skrillex, 9 of them, landed heavy on the platform with each step, feet built for seismic reading, kicking up small purple clouds with every contact. She walked off the ramp and stopped at the edge of the platform. She carried nothing except a canteen and a small folded square of paper, and she touched the paper square exactly twice, once with her right index finger, once with her thumb before she stepped onto the sand. Krexol noted this. He did not know what to note it as, so he noted it as behavioral anomaly pre-entry. He saved the timestamp. The heat hit her immediately. He could see it in the biometric feed. Her skin temperature ticked up 4 degrees in the first 30 seconds. At 80 degrees ambient with 12% humidity, the desert air was not thick. It was the opposite of thick. It was the driest thing on this side of the sector. The Vixari cadet, whose translucent skin was already cycling from clear to pale violet under the temperature, moved past her toward the center of the group. Candidate 47 looked up at the observation drone overhead. She said, "Is there a water fountain nearby?" "The air feels thick." The Belvroni technical officer 2 meters to her left, armored plates, stress-reactive clicking mechanism in the shoulder joints, clicked 3 times in rapid sequence. Krexol's throat pouch spasmed. The air did not feel thick. The air at 80 degrees with 12% humidity felt like a dry mouth, like a cracked lip, like the inside of a place where things came to stop existing. He had written that exact description in his environmental briefing notes for 200 consecutive trials. He had the notes saved. He saved this timestamp too. The trial began at 1400 hours exactly. Krexol had a standard routine for the first phase. He tracked the species clusters, noted stress responses, logged the early environmental casualties. It was not dramatic work. It was mostly watching numbers change and writing down what they changed too. The Threxians moved well at first. Their crystalline joint structure was not ideal for 80-degree sand. Thermal expansion was always a concern with crystalline compositions, but they had mass and forward momentum and they knew how to read terrain. 11 entered. 7 lasted the first hour. The Vixari went violet within 90 seconds of full sun exposure. Not panic violet, just the baseline stress coloring their skin produced when external temperature exceeded their comfort range by more than 15 degrees. The observer in the elevated monitoring station, a Vixari herself, had been running at a pale lavender all morning. She went deep indigo the moment candidate 47 stepped onto the sand. Krexol noticed. He did not note it yet. The Qualeri hive was the first real problem of the day. 6 bodies operating as one thermal mass sounds like an advantage in a hot environment. The logic is sound on paper. Shared body heat means shared thermal regulation, which means the group can cool one end while the other holds. What the logic misses is that in 80-degree heat with 12% humidity, 6 warm bodies pressed together generate more heat than they dissipate. Shared warmth becomes shared liability. At the 53-minute mark, the hive's internal temperature crossed 94 degrees Celsius. All 6 bodies went down at once, which was the one thing about Qualeri biology that never stopped being hard to watch. The way a hive collapse looked like a single organism folding. Not 6 individuals, 1. Krexol logged the timestamp. He noted the cause. He kept his eyes on feed 47. She was walking, not running, not crouching to reduce heat exposure, which was the instinctive response for mammals in high-temperature environments, and the first thing his briefing notes recommended. Not seeking shade. Walking at a measured pace that his tracking system clocked at 4.2 kilometers per hour. The same pace he would notice later that she had used stepping off the ramp. She did not vary it. At the 8-minute mark, she stopped beside a 12-meter needlethorn cactus. The quills on a needlethorn ran about 30 centimeters long and carried 0.4 milliliters of neurotoxin each, enough to drop a 200-kilogram mammal in 11 seconds. She stood close enough to the trunk that one wrong step would have put a quill through her forearm. She looked up at the observation drone again. Then she touched the paper square in her pocket and kept walking. Krexol exhaled slowly. His middle heart had ticked up 2 beats per minute. He made himself log the cadet count instead, 55 active feeds at 1400. By 1408 it was 49. By 1430 it was 33. The sounds were what stayed with him later. Not the visuals he had seen versions of before in 847 previous trials. It was the sounds that were new. Threxian crystalline joints fracturing under thermal stress did not sound like breaking. It sounded like glass settling, like something that had been under pressure for a long time finally accepting that it couldn't hold. The sound traveled through the sand and came up through the platform floor, and Vrix, standing beside him, shifted his weight from foot to foot every time it happened. At the 40-minute mark, Vrix had developed 3 new hairline fractures in his own left shoulder joint from standing still and watching. The Skrillex moved differently under stress. They were ground-based hunters built for seismic reading. Their feet had sensors that could map terrain through vibration alone, which made them exceptional in stable environments and completely counterproductive in purple sand. Every step they took sent a signal back that the ground was wrong, hostile, not mappable. 3 of them eventually stopped moving and pressed their foot sensors to the sand, as if they could read their way to safety, if they just held still long enough. They were still there when Krexol ran the hour 1 count. 55 at start, 33 at 30 minutes. By the hour mark, 22 active feeds. He checked feed 47. Green, body temperature running 4 degrees above baseline but stable. Hydration within normal range, she was using the canteen. Walking pace, 4.2 kilometers per hour. She had covered 2.1 kilometers in 30 minutes. In a straight line, No deviation, no shelter-seeking, no threat avoidance maneuvering. She was walking through the cacti fields the way someone walked to a destination they already knew. No armor on her shoulders, no crystalline joints in her spine, no hive to press against in the cold. He had run that calculation about 100 times since 1400 hours, and it kept coming out the same way. She had nothing, not one biological feature that his 12,000 years of Academy survival data said you needed out there. Crexall pulled up her file. Name, Riley. Surname withheld in Academy records, which was unusual. Species, Homo sapiens, Earth origin. Volunteer designation for Class 9, which was even more unusual because Class 9 volunteers had historically been species with enough biological confidence to believe the trial was survivable. Earth had submitted one candidate. 1. Her psychological profile read, methodical patient, high stress tolerance baseline. The Academy psychologist who had filed the assessment had added a note at the bottom. Cadet demonstrated consistent calm under assessment conditions. Recommend observing under field conditions before drawing conclusions about stress response. That note had been filed 11 months ago. The psychologist had not specified what conclusions they were waiting for. He watched her walk. At 2 hours and 14 minutes, she stopped again. This time she was standing at the base of the largest needle thorn in the eastern sector. 16 meters tall, 4 meters in diameter, the kind of cactus that had been growing in this desert for longer than the Academy had been running trials on it. The quills on this one ran full length, 30 centimeters, tips so fine they were almost invisible in the heat shimmer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the paper square. She unfolded it once, not all the way, just one layer of the fold, and looked at one of the creases. She held it for about 4 seconds. Then she folded it back and put it away. Then she reached into her boot and pulled out a blade. It was small, maybe 6 centimeters, and steel, which meant it had survived the equipment scan, which meant it fell below the prohibited threshold, which meant no one had thought to ask why a soft-shelled mammal with no armor was bringing a steel blade to a cactus trial. Crexall should have thought to ask. She pressed the blade against the cactus trunk and began to cut. He sat up straighter. She was cutting a vertical slit in the bark, 40 centimeters, maybe 45. She worked steadily, with the same 4.2 kilometers per hour energy she had been using all afternoon, no rushing, no panic, just a consistent downward pressure on the blade, the cactus flesh splitting slow and green. Crexall understood what she was about to do approximately 2 seconds before she did it. She'll die in 11 seconds, he said. His voice came out flat. The neurotoxin. The scanner started warming up. She cut, she crawled, she disappeared. The cactus closed around her, and Crexall's throat pouch went completely flat, and the scanner panel woke up with a color he had never seen before on a live cadet feed. Yellow. Not red, yellow. He stared at it. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 60 degrees and was falling fast. The 40-minute night cycle had started at 2040 hours, and Torvak Prime's night did not ease you into it. It dropped the temperature by 10 degrees every 4 minutes until it hit -30, and then it held there for 6 hours. The Threxians still in the field were locking their joints against the cold, each one going rigid in a different posture, like statues caught mid-argument. The 3 Skrillex who had pressed their seismic feet into the sand had curled around themselves, sensors tucked in, giving up on mapping and just trying to hold heat. The Belvroni cadet, the one whose armor had clicked 3 times when Riley spoke, was trying to flex his shoulder plates and finding that the cold had already started the fusion process. Belvroni armor fused in negative temperatures. It was a known vulnerability. He had 12 minutes before his arms locked. Crexall watched all of this in his peripheral vision. In the center of his focus, a yellow light and a reading that said the cactus was not killing her. He read it twice, he read it a 3rd time. Subject 47, neurotoxin absorption, 22%. Metabolic conversion ongoing. Toxin categorization, reclassified as nutrient type F. He had been an Academy examiner for 31 years. He had a database of biological responses to Class 9 conditions that covered 412 species across 12,000 years of trials. Neurotoxin absorption was not a category that appeared in that database. Neurotoxin was a cause of casualty, not a metabolic variable. You did not absorb neurotoxin. You were incapacitated by it in 11 seconds and extracted by the medical team, or you weren't extracted in time, and your name went on the hull in phosphorus ink. Reclassified as nutrient type F, he said out loud. Vrix, beside him, said nothing. He had stopped talking about 40 minutes ago. The thermal camera switched on automatically when external temperatures dropped below 0. It showed the inside of the needle thorn in soft orange and yellow. the cactus's own biological warmth, stored from 8 hours of 80-degree sunlight, now radiating slowly into the cavity. And in the center of that warmth, a small body curled on its side in a space the width of a large dog. Her body temperature read 22 degrees Celsius. Outside, the air was -6 and dropping. The differential between her body heat and the air outside the cactus wall was 28 degrees and growing. By the time the temperature bottomed out at -30, it would be 52 degrees. The cactus was holding her. No, she was holding herself, using the cactus. Crexall was not sure those were the same thing, and the distinction bothered him in a way he could not quite name. The pH of the internal fluid in a needlethorn cactus was 1.8. Crexall knew this because it was in the environmental briefing he had written himself, under the heading Why Non-Armored Species Should Not Contact Cactus Internals. pH 1.8 was aggressive enough to begin breaking down soft tissue in 30 minutes. Standard primate skin, which was what she had, no armor, no chitinous reinforcement, just skin, should have been showing dissolve markers by now. He pulled up the biometric skin panel. It showed accelerated cell turnover, thickening epidermis. Her skin was getting tougher. At hour 3, Crexall made himself do the count. 19 active feeds. Riley's was one of them. 11 Threxians had entered. 7 were still out there, joints locked in the cold, waiting for the temperature to turn. The Skrillex who had buried themselves had gone quiet, their biometrics still registered, but flat, which meant they had slowed their own systems down, a self-preservation response that sometimes worked and sometimes meant they wouldn't come back up. The Vixari participants were clustered together in a shallow ravine. Not an ideal shelter, but better than nothing. And one human, in a cactus, not dying. He pulled up the historical records on mammalian Class 9 attempts. He had these memorized. He had recited them at 847 trial orientations. First attempt, year 3204 of Academy Standard Timeline. Species, Reth, a mammal-adjacent soft body from the outer belt. Result, heat casualty, hour 1. Last attempt before today, year 11,940. Species, Homo sapiens, different candidate. Result, quill strike, 4 minutes. 12,000 years, 0 passes. He closed the file and looked at the live feed. Feed 47, green, skin panel thickening, toxin panel, conversion ongoing. The number he had recited 847 times, and the feed in front of him could not both be true, and he had spent the last 3 hours watching one of them prove the other wrong. He set the file down. At hour 4, the external audio pickups caught a sound from the needlethorn sector, muffled, slightly distorted by the cactus wall. He had to run it through the audio amplifier twice before he could make out the words. She said, dormant, different process. No context, no follow-up. He could not tell if she was talking to herself, to the cactus, or to no one at all. Vrix turned to look at him. Crexall said nothing. He saved the audio timestamp and kept watching. The night had 5 more hours to run. The blade went all the way in. Crexall watched the cut open, 40 centimeters of green cactus flesh splitting apart, fluid running down the trunk in thin ropes, catching the last of the thermal camera's ambient light. The quills around the slit had not touched her. She had measured the gap exactly, or she had been lucky, or she understood something about needlethorn geometry that was not in his briefing notes. She was through the slit before he finished processing what he was looking at. The scanner panel was already running. He could hear it, a low cycling sound it made when the readings were outside its normal parameters, when it was reaching further back into its database to find a match. He had heard that sound twice before in 31 years. Once for a Qualari hive that fused bodies mid-trial in a way no one had documented. Once for a Threxian whose crystalline joints had calcified in real time rather than fracturing. The panel settled. Yellow light, not red. He read the line again. Toxin categorization, reclassified as nutrient type F. There was no type F in the Academy's toxin database. He checked. He opened the database right then, at 2047 hours, with the temperature outside sitting at -12 and falling. And he searched for type F. The search came back empty. The scanner had generated a category that did not exist because the categories that did exist had nowhere to put what her body was doing. The Academy's framework had just met something it couldn't measure, and it had responded the way any system responds when it hits the edge of its own map. It made something up. The night ran 6 hours. Crexall stayed at the panel for all of it. He sent Vrix to the rest area at hour 2. The junior examiner's left shoulder had developed 11 new hairline fractures from standing still and watching, and Crexall could hear the micro sounds every time Vrix shifted his weight, a thin, high whine like a string pulled too tight. Vrix went without arguing, which meant he was rattled enough to stop being professional about it. Crexall did not feel the need to sleep. He had 3 hearts and a physiological stress response that expressed itself through his throat pouch rather than his pulse rate. So he could sit at a monitoring panel for 6 straight hours and look completely calm to anyone watching from outside, even while the pouch stayed flat and his middle heart ran 4 beats per minute above baseline without coming down. He ran the night count at 2,200 hours. 19 feeds active when the night cycle began. By midnight, 14. 3 Skrillex had buried themselves in the sand before temperatures dropped and hadn't come back up. Their biometrics still registered, faint and slow, which meant they were alive but not moving, which meant the extraction team would have to dig. 1 Threxian's joint calcification had gone too far. The feed had gone orange, then amber, then extraction protocol had activated at 2318 hours. The Belvroni cadet's armor had fully fused at the shoulders by 2200. He was mobile from the waist down. The extraction team had noted it and logged it and were waiting for him to signal, which he hadn't done yet, because the Academy allowed cadets to signal for extraction voluntarily, and he had not yet decided to do that. Feed 47 was green. Body temperature, 22 degrees Celsius. The air outside was -21. The cactus wall between her and the desert was absorbing the cold at the outer layer and holding warmth at the interior, a passive thermal gradient that the needlethorn had evolved over thousands of years for reasons entirely unrelated to sheltering primates. She had used that gradient the way someone uses a tool they found lying on the ground, without ceremony, without hesitation, without giving any indication that she understood it was supposed to be impossible. Skin panel thickening continued. The accelerated cell turnover was still running. Whatever her epidermis was doing in response to pH 1.8 fluid, it was doing it consistently, and it had been doing it for 4 hours. At hour 4 of the night, 44 hours by the Academy clock, he heard her voice again through the external audio pickup. She said, muffled and close-up, the words pressing against the inside of the cactus wall. "Warmer on this side." That was all. He sat with that for a long time. At 3:12 hours, Crexall opened the historical mammalian Class 9 file. He had this memorized. He had recited these numbers at 847 trial orientations, in the same order, in the same flat examiner's voice he used for all intake briefings. First mammalian attempt, year 3204 of Academy Standard Timeline, species Reth, result heat casualty at the 1-hour mark. Subsequent attempts listed chronologically. Last attempt before today, year 11,940. Species Homo sapiens, different candidate, result quill strike at 4 minutes. 12,000 years, 0 passes. He read the file from the beginning anyway, all of it. Every species, every year, every result. It took him 22 minutes. He read it the way you read something you are hoping will say something different than you remembered. It said the same thing it always said. Then he looked at the live feed. Feed 47, green. Temperature stable. Toxin panel. Conversion ongoing. 4 hours and 26 minutes inside a cactus, and the only thing the scanner had flagged in the last 2 hours was that her cell turnover rate had increased slightly, which meant whatever adaptation was running, it was still running. The number he had recited 847 times and the feed in front of him could not both be correct. He had understood this since 2047 hours. What he had not understood until right now, reading the file from beginning to end at 3:12 in the morning, was that the 12,000 years had never been a record of impossibility. It had been a countdown. Every 0 on that list had been the trial meeting the wrong species, not a wall, a waiting room. He closed the file. He did not open it again. The temperature began climbing at 4:52 hours. Torvak Prime's day cycle came back as fast as the night had arrived, 10 degrees every 4 minutes, starting from -30 and moving toward 80. The surviving cadets in the field began moving. The Threxians unlocked their joints in sequence, each one audible, that glass-settling sound through the sand, and started orienting toward the extraction waypoint, because the trial protocol said that surviving the night cycle was the completion condition, and most of them had survived it barely, and they knew what surviving looked like. The Belvroni cadet finally signaled extraction at 5:01 hours. His arms had been locked at his sides for 3 hours. He sent the signal with his chin. By 5:20, the temperature was back above 0. By 5:37, it was 20 degrees. By 5:48, it was 40. At 5:53 hours, the slit in the largest needle thorn in the eastern sector opened from the inside. Crexall leaned forward. A hand came through first, pressing against the edge of the cut to widen it, then a shoulder, then the rest of her moving backward out of the cactus the way she had gone in steady, measured, no wasted motion. She was covered in green pulp and dried cactus fluid from her collar to her knees. Her hair had matted against the left side of her head. Her left sleeve was torn at the elbow, showing a forearm that looked on the thermal camera slightly brighter than the surrounding tissue, warmer, more active. The biometric skin panel, still running, still said thickening, still said accelerated turnover. She stood up. She blinked twice, looked left, then right, the same way someone looks when they step out of a building and are deciding which direction to go. Then she reached into her pocket. The paper square came out, still folded, still intact. He could see it on the close-range camera, the one the observation team used for artifact documentation. A small rectangle of pale paper that had spent a night inside a pH 1.8 cactus full of neurotoxin, in negative 30-degree cold, against a body running accelerated metabolic processes, and it looked like she had just taken it out of a desk drawer. She touched it once, tucked it back. Then she smoothed a wrinkle on the front of her jacket. It was the left side, just below the chest pocket, a wrinkle she had apparently noticed as she stood up. She smoothed it flat with 2 passes of her palm, looked down to check the result, and looked up at the observation drone overhead. She said, "Is that all you've got?" Crexall heard this in his left hearing channel, through the audio pickup at 5:54 hours. He did not move for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at the scan panel, all of it. Every reading she had generated since 1400 hours yesterday. Heat stability, hydration steady, skin thickening, toxin conversion ongoing, temperature differential survived, night cycle cleared. He looked at the field count, 12 cadets still active when the night ended. She was one of them, the only mammal. At 7:12 hours, the Academy's classification database updated automatically. He saw the notification on his secondary screen. Standard system flag, the kind that appeared when a trial result triggered a threshold review. He had seen these flags before. They usually meant a species had demonstrated a capability outside its logged threat level, which triggered a review process that took 3 to 6 weeks and resulted in a formal reclassification document signed by the senior board. He opened the flag. The update had already been processed. No review, no board signature. 3 technicians had approved it at the field level, which was not the standard process, which told him that whoever those 3 technicians were, they had looked at the data and decided that waiting 3 to 6 weeks for a formal process was not the right response to what they were looking at. The entry read, Homo sapiens, Earth origin, reclassified, effective 7:12 hours. Old classification, Tier 4, non-threatening sentinel. New classification, Tier 1, environmental catalyst. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a database entry that had quietly rewritten 12,000 years of taxonomy while the breakfast trays were being cleared from the observation deck above him, while the surviving cadets were logging their trial completion forms, while Torvak Prime's sand was heating back up toward 80 degrees, and the needlethorn cacti stood in their rows, unchanged, unaware, still full of neurotoxin that one small human had spent a night converting into something her body called food. A database update, a species reclassified, 14 Academy installations across the sector that received the update automatically and silently, without a briefing, without an explanation, with no record of what had happened on Torvak Prime to cause it. Somewhere in 14 different systems, 14 different classification databases had just changed one entry. 14 different analysts would eventually look at it and have no context for why. They would know that Homo sapiens had been moved. They would not know what moved them. Crexall sat with that for a long moment. Then he started writing his trial report. He could not finish it. He could not finish it. Or rather, he finished the factual sections, the timestamps and cadet counts and extraction logs, all the parts that had clear, correct answers. What he could not write was the analysis section, the part where the senior examiner was required to provide an interpretive summary of the trial's outcomes and their implications for future classification. He had never failed to write an analysis section before. He had written 847 of them. He saved the document and closed it. He told himself he would return to it in the morning. He returned to it in the morning and saved it again without adding anything. He did this for 11 days. On the 12th day, he filed his resignation. The official form had a field for reason, which allowed for a maximum of 300 characters. He wrote, unspecified biological incompatibility with continued service. This was technically accurate. He filed it and received a confirmation notification, and sat in his quarters for the rest of the afternoon, not doing anything in particular. He did not file the analysis section. What he did instead was put a photograph in his locker. He had pulled it from the observation deck's archive footage, a frame from 5:56 hours on the morning of the trial's completion, a still taken from the wide-angle camera that covered the eastern sector. In the photograph, Riley was walking back toward the extraction waypoint. The air above the purple sand was deforming from the heat, already back above 50 degrees by that point, the shimmer making the background ripple and blur. She was walking at 4.2 kilometers per hour. She had one hand in her pocket. He kept the photograph in his locker. He did not look at it every day. Some days he did not open the locker at all. Some days he looked at the photograph and then closed the locker and went back to whatever he had been doing. He was not sure what he was trying to understand by looking at it, and he was not sure understanding was the right word for what he was after. He will not file another report. He will not run another trial. He will not walk past that corridor without stopping. 6 months after the trial, on a night when the Academy's internal clocks read 300, and most of the facility was quiet, Crexall stood in the corridor outside the wall of anomalies. The wall was a long display case, reinforced glass, climate-controlled, running the full length of the East Wing's secondary corridor. It held 41 artifacts from 12,000 years of Academy trials, a fragment of crystalline exoskeleton from a Threxian cadet who had survived conditions outside the modeled tolerance range, a recording chip from a Vixari observer whose stress coloration data had exceeded the upper limit of the measurement scale, a piece of hull plating from a training vessel that had continued functioning after catastrophic systems failure in ways the engineering team still couldn't fully explain. 42 artifacts now. The 42nd case, third from the left in the new edition, held a small folded square of pale paper. The label on the case was printed in the Academy's standard archival font, black on white. Psychological Force Multiplier, Human Extraction 9, Class 9 Qualification Artifact, Origin. Children's Picture Book, Earth, Unknown Title. The lighting in the corridor was low at 300. The case's internal light was on a soft, warm beam that came from below the artifact, angled upward. It caught the softened edges of the paper. The places where fingers had creased and recreased the same folds hundreds of times, wearing the surface down to something almost smooth. The original image on the paper's face reduced to suggestions. A shape that might have been an animal, a line that might have been a horizon. Crexall stood in front of the case. His throat pouch had not inflated properly in 184 days. Threxian physicians had reviewed his biometrics 3 times. They had found nothing structurally wrong. The pouch tissue was healthy. The neural pathways that controlled inflation were intact. Their consensus, delivered with the careful language physicians used when they were certain about something they would rather not say directly, was that the disruption was psychological in origin. They were right. He knew they were right. He looked at the paper crane. He thought about the cactus. About the scanner reading yellow at 2047 hours on a night that was minus 21 degrees and dropping. About pH 1.8 fluid and thickening skin, and a metabolic process that had no category in the database until the database invented one. About the way she had smoothed a wrinkle in her jacket, 2 passes, left hand, checking the result, on a morning when she was covered in green pulp and dried cactus fluid, and had spent 6 hours inside a thing that should have dissolved her. About a planet, somewhere in the galaxy, that had made something capable of all of that. The corridor was quiet. The climate control system ran a low hum that he had stopped hearing years ago and only noticed now because everything else was still. The lighting caught the paper's worn edges and held them.